Good evening, everyone. I could not be more thrilled with how we are about to spend our Wednesday evening. I know if you're in St. Louis, we had a rainy, dreary day. So, what better to do than to curl up with a good book and listen to some incredible authors talk about good books? I personally can't think of anything better. So, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Stephanie. I am with The Novel Neighbor. We are an independently and woman-owned operated bookstore located in St. Louis, Missouri. And we have two incredible authors with us this evening. Before I introduce them, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you have not already purchased your copy of the books that we're about to talk about, they're available online. If you're tuning in from somewhere that's not St. Louis, please do not worry. We do ship to you, and we would love to get you set up with those books. Wow, I really lost my thought there for a second, everyone. Sorry. We are going to have the authors in conversation together for a little bit, and then we will have time for a Q&A. So please feel free to drop those questions into the comments wherever you're watching, and we will make sure that we get to them. We love having audience questions. We love hearing what is resonating with you from this conversation. So please feel free to drop those at any time, and we will do that kind of towards the end of our time together this evening. And then, of course, we always have our signature this or that questions at the end. I'm very excited. We have some fantasy themed ones this time, and I can't wait to hear those answers. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our authors. Our first author this evening is Leslie Penelope, who has been writing since she could hold a pen and loves getting lost in the worlds in her head. She is an award-winning author of fantasy and paranormal romance. She was born in the Bronx just after the birth of hip-hop, but left before she could acquire an accent. Equally left and right brain, she studied film at Howard University and minored in computer science. This led to a graduate degree in multimedia and a career in website development. She's also an award-winning independent filmmaker, co-founded a literary magazine, and sometimes dreams in HTML. Leslie lives in Maryland with her husband and their furry dependents. And Leslie is joining us this evening to talk to the incredible Rebecca Roanhorse, who is the New York Times bestselling author of Trail of Lightning, Storm of Locus, Black Sun, and Star Wars Resistance Reborn. And of course, adding to that list, Fevered Star, which we cannot wait to talk about. She has won the Nebula, Hugo, and Locus Awards for her fiction and was the recipient of the 2018 Astounding Award for Best New Writer. The new book in her Between Earth and Sky series, Fevered Star, just came out yesterday. She lives in New Mexico with her family. Rebecca, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here with Rebecca.
Yeah, glad to be here. Yay.
Yay.
And we're on.
So we are celebrating Fevered Star, which I'm super excited about. Okay. Black Sun is an incredible achievement, and personally, I'm interested in the research aspect. As someone who's writing historical fantasy, although 20th century history, not quite so far back as where you were pulling from, knowing how difficult research is, I'd love to hear more about research, and especially when you're researching cultures that don't have a lot of written records. The written records were destroyed, and so how did you approach that research?
Yeah. So hopefully folks are familiar with Black Sun, but if not, Black Sun, Fevered Star, they're part of the Between Earth and Sky trilogy, and they are inspired by the pre-Columbian cultures of the Americas. So think of cultures as varied as the Maya, the Mexica, or the Aztecs, the ancestral Puebloans, the Cahokia Mound Builders, which you should be familiar with if you're in St. Louis. All of those cultures sort of went into the research that I was doing. And a lot of it I've just lived with. I didn't do specific research for because I already had sort of the context. I've been reading about for example, the Maya for, decades now. And I live in New Mexico. I have Pueblo relatives and ancestral, have family ties to Pueblos. So those were familiar. I did do some specific research. For example, I was not familiar with the Maritime Maya. And so there is, of course, like a big sea journey in Black Sun. And I wanted it to be specific to the worlds that I was creating. I didn't want to base it on European shipbuilding or European sailing methods. So I did do some research on that. But as you mentioned, there's not a whole lot of research to be found. There's not a lot of information to be found. I mean, all of the information I found was mostly in academic papers. And even that is limited. So I had to make stuff up. Like any good fantasy writer, I had to improvise. And so I did draw from Polynesian sailing methods to create the Teek sort of sailing methods. I tried to stay true to Maya shipbuilding, what we know of it, as far as like the length and a mode of transportation. Did they use oars or paddles or sails, things like that. But as far as like the mythos, most of that I made up, like the giant crows, clearly, and things like that. Mostly because I love crows. And I was really having a crow haunting, I guess, at the house we were living at the time. We just had a huge flock of crows that would come and visit like every day.
Oh,
And I would
wow.
sit out on our upstairs. There was like an abandoned house, like sort of down from us. And they loved to go and like roost on that house. And then they'd fly over and they'd like, yell at me and stuff. And so we became like buds. But yeah, it was pretty awesome. So, and then I did research on crows. That's why I sort of brought that up, because after I got really interested in them and they started to figure into the mythos, and I really wanted Serapio to have this attachment to crows, I needed to understand how crows would interact with humans. And there's some great books. If I'm actually in a hotel room, if you couldn't tell, but at home, I usually like hold up some of my research books, but it's called The Gift of the Crow, I believe. And it's a great book about sort of crow interactions and sort of how crows think, like what we know about them and how they use tools and just how smart they are, like that they never forget a face. They have funerals. They're just really awesome creatures. And so I did do research to hopefully get some of that correct. But like I said, a lot of it I made up.
That is really cool because the world comes through so well, and
Yeah. Thank you.
the balance between sort of making things up in your world building and basing it on something that's real and true is always, I think it's something that all fantasy writers kind of struggle with, or you're always kind of playing around with that balance. And then sometimes, so when you're dealing with basing it in cultures that are real life and that you have history with or that are personal to you, do you ever think about like how do you create a story or create a culture that honors that kind of respects the real people, the real ancestors, and also takes it in a different direction? Like how do you come at that?
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. I think that everybody's probably going to approach it in a different way. I think you just, as a writer, I think you have integrity, and you try to do your best. And, I really also tried to stay true to sort of indigenous thinking, of at least is what I understand of like Mesoamerican worldview, things like that in the story. So it's not just like, oh, I just slap on, some brown paint and now everybody, we all sail around the Gulf of Mexico and here we are. So, it's like, okay, so, what is the indigenous worldview about sort of light and dark and how they interact, and what is, is it about balance, or is it light conquers dark, or like, what is that, because that's not it, by the way, I'll give you that hint. Or sort of, it was very important for me to integrate queer identities, particularly non-binary identities, into this world, because that seemed more true to the sort of indigenous worldview. And certainly there are historical documents of non-binary folks from the Mesoamerican world. And it wasn't until really the Spanish invasion, in the later European conquest, and the role of Catholicism in conquest, that these non-binary folks sort of didn't have a place anymore. But because before, if anything, they were held up as sort of like the wise people in the community. And there were multiple genders, at least 4 genders, like in Navajo, things like that. So I think that that's important too, like not just to get the historical elements correct, but to capture the spirit and sort of the worldview of the cultures that you're trying to draw from, that have inspired you. So that it should inspire you for more than just, oh, did I get the shoes correct? Did I get the style of dress correct?
Right.
That is certainly adds to sort of the the word I'm looking for starts with a V, the
Verisimilitude.
Thank you. That one.
I
It
love that
adds
one.
to that, but I don't think it's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. So, okay, how many books do you have planned in the series?
Oh, I have 3. And I
Okay.
know you wrote is it the Earthsinger
Chronicles,
Chronicles? And
yeah.
they had 4 books, right? You had 4?
It's 4 full-length books, 3 novellas, so it's, yeah, a bunch of books.
Wow. That's awesome. By the way, everyone should read that. It's
Thank
excellent.
you.
But yeah, I kind of wanted to have 4, but
Mm-hmm.
I had a talk with my editor and we decided to on 3. But I expect 3 to be a chunky book
Mm-hmm.
that probably would take up on your shelf, the space of 2 books,
Right.
but just 1.
3, I think 3 is a good number because when I was getting to book 4, I was like, why did I decide this was 4 books? I feel like that was a mistake. And at a certain point, I was like, oh no, this needs to be 5 books, but no one's going to buy a 5th book. I don't want to write a 5th book either. So
Exactly.
3 seems more manageable.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk of like, how long do you really want to live in this world? Because it takes up, years of your life to write these
Yes,
books. I know,
absolutely.
bless readers. I'm the same way, but like, you can read the book in a day, 2
Right.
days, maybe a week, but it's like a year of our lives at
Yeah.
least, if you include editing and
Yes.
it goes
And
out.
rewriting.
Yes, and rewriting, definitely rewriting. It's a year, 2 years, at least 18 months. So it's just
Hmm.
like, wow, wow. So, do I want to live in the Meridian for 4 or 5 years if I wrote 4 books? I'm not sure, so we decided on 3.
Yeah, no, I think that's safe for your sanity, and maybe you can revisit it in the future if you ever wanted to.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I like that novella idea. There are, sort of side characters that their stories don't get told that I would love to tell.
Hmm.
For example, Saya, Serapio's mother.
Hmm.
Right now, I don't really plan to tell her story, but she's one of my favorite characters, even though I'm going to assume everybody's read Black Sun, so I might spoil it lightly. I'll try not to spoil Fevered Star, though. But certainly, she lived a life.
Hmm.
And I would love to tell her story, even though, she dies in the first chapter of Black Sun. So,
And you see her in the epigraphs. I noticed you have,
yes.
these great epigraphs before each chapter, which is something that I did too. And
Oh,
I was asked to actually add them by my editor. So I was wanting to ask you, how did the epigraphs come about? Because they're a great way to dig in and get a little bit of, say, as a child and other,
mhm.
backstory, other pieces of the world that gives you context for the actual story.
Yeah, they're actually one of my favorite things. So I had written interstitials first. So every few chapters or something, I would have an interstitial, which is the same thing as the epigraph. And my editor was like, "These are great. Like, this is one of the best parts. Like, have you thought about doing it for every chapter?" And I was like, "No, these are good." But then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, "Yeah, I should go back and do that because I think they really." Carry a lot of they do a lot of heavy lifting, like you were saying, like they allow you to world build very succinctly. Like in Black Sun, you don't get a lot about the Teek, but hopefully I think those epigraphs are working overtime to sort of start to create the world of the Teek. So you get all their sort of like pithy sayings and their wisdom, and you get a feel for what their culture's like, even though you spend no time there. And even though Xiala does not really share, much about what Teek is like.
Hmm.
So yeah, and then I usually write them last.
Okay.
After I've written the book, I go back and I sort of see like where things, can sort of I guess how I wanna sum up the chapter
Mm,
and
yeah.
like what, sort of what fits best and which character point of view has it been in, and so like what's really appropriate, for the epigraph. But I love writing them. They're one of my favorite parts.
Yeah, that was the same way. I did mine last. I kind of reviewed the chapter, the themes of it, and like in the first book of my series, they were all folk tales. So it was
Mhm.
an in-world book, and that turned into in every book of this series, it was
Oh,
a different
nice.
in-world book that had the
Mhm.
epigraphs. And so it would take about 2 weeks at the end to
Yeah.
go back through and write all the epigraphs. But it was fun. People really seemed to like them. And I think it, like you said, it does that world building, that extra work. It makes it seem so much bigger because in
Yeah.
a way that you sprinkle little things in world building. You mention things that you never show, but it gives the audience an idea of this much bigger world.
Yeah, and actually in Fevered Star, I do have one in-world book that has epigraphs.
Oh, cool.
So that's pretty cool. Well, I guess actually there's more than that because I forgot about the war one. But anyway, I like that idea. I think it's really cool. So, and I agree. It sort of gives it like some weight, your world weight.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, Fevered Star, give us the overview of how does it expand on what you started doing in Black Sun?
Yeah. Oh gosh. So Fevered Star is a book 2. And book 2 is always a little challenging. And I know there's gonna be a debate out there, like, is this a good book 2 or a bad book 2? But really, I think what it is a different book 2. So I think Black Sun, you have a clock, you have a countdown, at the beginning of each chapter, you're really building towards something. And it's very focused in sort of on creating the characters and their relationships. Fevered Star is a little more traditional fantasy. It sort of goes boom, it expands the world. And so I spend a lot of time on politics, on the sort of intra-clan, city-state politics, the larger world of the Meridian and the treaty that has held these 4 city-states together. I did a deep dive into a lot of the mythology and the magic and like where it comes from and how it developed. So you get sort of a wider world view. So certainly the characters are still moving forward. And this is really, I would say, a Narampa book as opposed to like a Serapia book. So you can sort of guess who the main character of book 3 will be. So the characters have clear arcs, I think, and they're still moving forward. But the idea really was to give you sort of that epic fantasy feel of being in a much larger world. I love in epic fantasy, the iceberg feel, where your story is just taking place on the surface, like right about here. But there's this massive iceberg, hundreds, if not thousands of years of history and lore and cultures right below it. And so our characters are just skimming the surface as they tell the story of their lives, or even, just a few moments, like mine's just, like 6 months in these people's lives that shatters their world, certainly. But, there's all this lore and history that happened before they were even born, which is going to become even more important. I won't say much, but as we work into book 3, because you'll sort of see the larger sort of mythos that these characters are actually working within a world of mythos that they're not even aware of. I mean, that's what I love about epic fantasy, that kind of stuff.
So how did you come about the plotting? Like you had all 3 books in your head. You had the entire story, I'm assuming, right? Or how much of it did you have?
No. Let's see. I had book 1 in my head.
Okay.
I knew how I wanted it to end. I've had the ending from the very beginning. And the rest of it, I sort of had to work out as I went along. I am definitely a plotter. I will, sort of plot out at least 80% of the novel before I start writing.
Okay.
In a lot of detail. Yeah, that's fair. But I try to leave about 20% in there for the muse to sort of have her way. And there were certainly surprises as I wrote, as I go along, and I'm like, oh, you know what? I think I want to go, this direction instead of this direction. That just makes more sense. Or, actually, I'm writing this character and this doesn't really feel correct, or, vice versa. And so I did not have the whole story in my head. Hopefully it feels very well plotted. Because one of the things I do love is I love to find sort of the threads. I try to lay a lot of threads in like a book 1 or like in an early story that then I can pick the ones that most interest me or the ones that have become most interesting and sort of follow those and thread them through book 2 and book 3, for the whole story. But often I won't know which of those threads I want to choose until I'm really into it and I'm writing.
Yeah, that's actually very similar to how I write. Because as I was asking the question, I'm like, you probably actually didn't. You're just a good enough writer where it feels like everything, you've gone back and everything makes sense. And it feels like you had all of that runway and you understood. But I'm a plotter also. And I like the same way, about 75%. And because I'm also a discovery writer. So I'll have these detailed outlines, but by the midpoint, it's like, okay, everything, I made all these great discoveries and things are changing all the time.
Yeah,
And you have to
absolutely.
leave room
Because
for that.
I think if you tie yourself down too tightly, then you lose, the chance to surprise yourself,
Yeah.
or for the story to what is the like evolve, I
Mm-hmm.
guess, and for the characters to evolve. Because often it is the characters that take you in surprising ways, that or directions that you didn't realize, that they wanted to go until they were there, and you're like, okay, then, all right,
Yeah.
we'll pursue that and see what happens.
And that's the fun part about writing, making those
Yeah,
discoveries, and
absolutely.
finding the places where you were wrong or you thought it was going to be like this, but
Yeah.
then this much better thing, this much more authentic thing happens. And oh no,
Hmm.
you have to go down that rabbit hole. Like that's the best
Yeah,
part.
absolutely.
So I wanted to ask about the multiple POVs because you talked about your characters and the arcs, and it can be difficult keeping everything together. I think Black Sun did a great job with multiple characters, multiple POVs, but it still felt like it was one cohesive story being told.
Mm.
And did you come in with one particular character, or how did you evolve the different POVs and weaving them together?
Yeah, so I wrote I wrote an early version of Black Sun, I'll tell you. Turned it into my editor, and I was very excited about it. And I think we met at at this conference in Boston. That is,
Boscone or
yes,
ReaderCon?
Boston. Thank you. Um, and it must have been like 2019 or something. And I was all
Mhm.
excited to talk about, what he thought about it. And, we went to dinner and I was like, so what do you think? What do you think? He's like, it's fine. It's fine. And I was like,
Not the
exactly.
reaction.
That's what I did. I was like, fine. What do you mean it's fine? I don't write fine.
This is obviously a work of staggering genius, right?
I know, but it was not. It was just fine. And so, I took it back. I was like, well, this won't do. So I tore it down to its bones. I saved the name Serapio. I saved the world. I knew sort of the world. I knew Tova. I hadn't really expanded past Tova. Actually, the first story was all just in Tova.
Mm,
And I rewrote it from scratch, basically.
yeah.
And I had a female pirate who I loved, like this sort of audacious, bisexual, hard drinking pirate woman. So I knew I wanted a sailor, and so I rebuilt, starting with Xiala at the center. And I knew Serapio was over here somewhere. He was going to happen, but I wasn't sure how that was all going to fit together. And since we were expanding the world, because my editor was like, it's not big enough,
Mm,
and I was like,
mhm.
but there are fantasies based in single cities. And he was like, yeah, but they're not epic. Damn it. So anyway, and I could be wrong. So feel free to write about your epic fantasies based in one city. But anyway, so I rewrote the whole thing centered around Xiala. And so Xiala was like, okay, so I know I want a sailor. So I need to know about the maritime Maya, and I need to know about
Mhm,
shipbuilding. And then I need a culture that's like a seafaring culture.
mhm,
And then I want her to be sort of this audacious woman. So what if we had like an all-female culture, maybe they drown their sons at birth, Yes, they
mm,
do. And that sort of thing. And then so it sort of expanded to that. Well, then maybe she needs to take Serapio on a voyage. And that's how we get to Tova. But I certainly wanted Tova in your mind from the beginning. So then I needed another sort of storyline to be centered in Tova.
mhm,
And so you have Narampa and you have Akoa who sort of carry the weight of familiarizing you with like Tovan politics and all the sort of muck, I guess, that Serapio is like going to be wading into, and just of course explode. So yeah, that's sort of where I started on the second round, and then of course I went through multiple rewrites like it always does.
right.
But the world building and the world really started with Xiala, and kind of like just flowed out from there, and picked up Serapio, picked up Tova, and then I knew we needed this larger world.
Mhm. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to rewrite. I think I wrote Song of Blood and Stone there's 3 different versions of it. So
Oh.
I do know the pain of doing something that you think is good, and then, oh no, you can make it better, and you push it a little further. But it seems like it's really interesting to hear kind of, because I can feel that like in the story, you can kind of Xiala being the core of it, and it expanding out from her story because she's such a vibrant character. I mean, I think they're
Mm.
all, they're all different and unique, but she's definitely one of my favorites of that book.
Yeah, I think she's a lot of people's favorites.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think female pirates, you get that rogue character who's always
Yeah,
gonna just
totally.
bring everybody in.
And she
And
does get a little more, I was just gonna say, she does get a little more introspective in Fevered Star. But I don't want to spoil like what happens. But she is dealing with sort of her powers and how to handle
Mhm.
them ethically and what that means, as opposed to Serapio. He's like, let's just murder a lot of people. But
Or
I
not.
actually, I know, for as sort of as much fun in a fantasy world, as
Mhm.
something like that is, I did want to have a moment where we have a little introspection about what it is to go in and like kill a bunch of people, and sort of like what the repercussions of that are,
Mhm.
not only on the person that does it, but, the people who are supposed to be their friends. How do you feel about your friend now? So like that sort of thing. And of course, for Serapio and Fevered Star, and I don't think this is giving too much away. Um, Now he has to deal with like Carrion Crow has to deal with the repercussions of his actions, and certainly
Mhm.
not everyone is happy.
Mhm.
It's sort of like we didn't ask you to do this for us.
Oh.
He's like, but my God, and they're like, yeah, this whole God thing. We should talk about that. So I think for me, it was a lot of fun to really interrogate this chosen one narrative or this concept that like, oh, you're the chosen one. You're going to come in and you're going to save us all.
Mhm.
Well, in real life, that doesn't happen that way. Like, not
Right.
everybody, wants to follow the chosen one. And sometimes the chosen one might not be the most mentally stable one because he thought he was the chosen one after all.
Right.
So, I wanted to play with some of those ideas a little bit. So it's a little less clear cut. It's a little less sort of the traditional high fantasy idea
Mhm.
of, the sort of boy savior that comes in and saves the world.
Right. And playing around with the different religions and the different magic systems and how they, what is the reality of it? I mean, you're
Mm.
there's magic in this world, and are there really gods, or is it, something else? And what does that even mean? I'm always fascinated by different people's perceptions of religion, and then different faith systems and different belief systems from different cultures and how they interact. And you're playing with all of that here, which in a really interesting way too.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a total religion nerd. That's what my degrees are in. That's what my background
Uh,
is in. I actually have a degree in theology because I'm that much of a religion nerd. So this was, yeah, a lot of fun for me to sort of play with those concepts.
and then the magic system, fantasy magic. I love magic systems.
Mm.
I don't know if it's actually, I wouldn't call it a system, but you have magic in, and I guess, I don't know, would you consider it a system, or how would you describe the magic in the world?
So it's Mesoamerican influenced in the sense, that a lot of it is, and you'll see in Fevered Star, you get a lot more a sense of how the magic works. I don't know if
Mhm.
I call it a magic system or not, just because does magic, must it be systematic, or is that
Right.
some weird like holdover from, the 18th, 19th century
Yeah.
European concepts of magic? Because I don't think that most like people who were not part of like the sort of Aleister Crowley style magic
Mhm.
ceremonial. That's what I'm looking for. Ceremonial magicians. Nobody else has a magic system. So
Right.
anyway, yeah. So I think you get more of that. I like magic. I like what N.K. Jemisin said about that magic should have a sense of wonder and the fantastic, and
Mhm.
that we don't have to figure it out like it's a math puzzle or it's like some sort of science. It can
Yeah.
it can be a little mysterious. It can be a little bit like, how did that work? We don't know because it's magic. Yeah.
Cool. And then the myth making.
Oh
You
yeah.
have, I think, it's all part of this whole like, very deep world and just really rich, but you do create mythology And how did you go about doing that? Or how did that kind of come from? And, you're always weaving together character and plot and world. And then
Yes.
adding in the myth is sort of the foundation for things. But yeah, how did you go about creating the myths, and what was the spark for those?
Yeah, well, crows mostly. I loved this concept of crows as I was doing, more research, and this idea that they have these long memories, that they don't
Mhm.
forget and that they hold grudges. Like they did a study, I think at like UC Berkeley or somewhere, where they had someone wear like I think it was like a Ronald Reagan mask and go out and like harass the crows, And so every day Ronald Reagan would go out and harass the crows, and the crows would remember, and they would tell all the other crows, oh, sorry, tell all the other crows about it. And they would be like, avoid Ronald Reagan or attack Ronald Reagan, or, whatever it was, the crows remembered the face. And they told not only their immediate sort of crew, but they passed it on to their children, and their children passed it on to their children. It was like a
Mhm.
generational thing. And I
Mhm.
was like, oh man, if that's not a mythology, like, what if there were a people who held grudges like the crow held a grudge? What would that look like? And how would they exact their revenge? And certainly I was interested in like generational trauma,
Mhm.
and how that all works. And, sort of that narrow road between justice and revenge. Like, how do you walk that road? What is sort of justice, and then what is just vengeance?
Yeah.
And is one okay and one not, or is it okay? Like if bad
Mhm.
things happen, is it okay to get vengeance? And
Right.
of course, what does that do to the person? Anyway, all of that stuff interests me, and so it all went into sort of the myth building around the crows, and of course, in pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures, they were huge astronomers. And they mapped, the stars and the heavens in like super precise detail. If you've ever been anywhere like Chaco Canyon or Mesa Verde, in New Mexico and Utah, I believe, in the Four Corners region, you know that you can line things up by the solstice, or and that there are things that map the eclipse and like all sorts of things. They recorded the Crab Nebula and like whenever in 1060 AD. Anyway, fascinating astronomers, and they lined their cities along like star routes and things like
Mhm.
that. Like they fit into the city building and the architecture and like all sorts of things. So I wanted that had to be part of it too. That
Mhm.
deep sort of study of the stars and this balance of what happened in the heavens, reflecting what happens on the earth and vice versa. That you need to try to live in the balance of those. If there's turmoil in the heavens, and there'll be turmoil on earth. Um, yeah, so I don't know, I'm sort of babbling, but all of that went into like the mythos and the world building. All of that was important to me, and to create some sort of cohesive world where this could happen, and there were stories, and of course, sort of um, the great animals, sort of that encompass or embody, I guess, the gods in different ways.
Mhm.
And so you get a little bit of that in Fevered Star, but certainly in the third book, you're going to have a whole lot of the history of the gods and sort of
Ah,
what happens, the War of the Gods.
cool.
Anyway, woo, very excited.
So I know book 2 just came out. Do you have a name for book 3? Can we know that, or is that still not?
I have one, but I'm not allowed to share it.
Okay.
Soon, hopefully. Yes.
That's so fair. And I'm probably gonna ask you 2 more questions about book 3. They're gonna be like, "Yeah, I know, and I cannot tell you." So we're already accepting that. You both have been so much fun to listen to.
Oh.
I have, like, been laughing out loud in the in my reading room. I definitely loved the moment, mostly where you were like, "Rebecca, like, you probably knew how it was gonna end," or, like, "You probably have all this thought out." Rebecca's, like, audibly laughs, is like, "That's hilarious." Um,
Sorry.
echoing Leslie's comments, I mean, it definitely seems like you have it all figured out because it just makes so much sense on the page and you plot it so brilliantly and it's paced.
Oh, thank you.
We have lots of great questions coming in from the chat and some questions that we collected from people and questions for both of you. So the first thing that I wanted to ask, because does tie into book 3, and I'm sure you're like actively working on book 3 right now, right? Like we have, okay. So, because normally I ask people, like, what do you miss about spending time with your characters? And I'm like, I think she's spending a lot of time with her characters. So I think really still working on that. But something that I think that we can talk about that's not spoilery is that it's not a surprise that, like, especially when it comes to fantasy and a series, we're going to lose some friends along the way. So how does it feel as an author to have to kill off some of your characters? Like, what does that do to you emotionally? Like, do you get upset about it? Are you like, no, I just knew this was the perfect ending for their story? What is that like for you, Rebecca?
It depends. Some characters were meant to be killed. Right? I mean, yes, you enjoy them, yes, whatever, but clearly they need to go. Others, it's much harder to let go of. And, but I guess, and Leslie, I don't know what's your thought on this. At some point, you do serve the plot. At some point, you're like, because, I mean, for us who've written it, okay, maybe the first time through, I cannot kill X, Y, and Z. But then, like, by the 4th or 5th time, you're like, you know what? It would work way better if he was dead. So, by that point, you're like, okay, I'm willing to, like, kill them. So.
Yeah, for the stakes. I mean, it's always hard. I hate killing characters, even like villains, I mean, sometimes, yes, they have to go, but I try to write them so that even the villains are hard to let go of a little bit, just a little bit. So it's tough.
Well, and I want to highlight, Leslie, that we've discussed that you have some books out in the world, but also you have a book coming out in August that is, I know that like finished arcs are into the world. Are you still spending time? Well, first of all, do you want to talk about the monsters we defy? Because I've mentioned this and I think everyone watching will need to know because it's definitely up their wheelhouse too if they're watching this.
Yeah, The Monsters We Defy is a 1920s fantasy heist story. So it takes place in Washington, D.C., 1925. And it's like a ragtag crew of people who have these powers that have been gifted to them / cursed to them by spirits. And they have to get together to pull off this heist and save the city. And it comes out in August. I'd never done a heist before. I'd had, epic fantasy series out. So this was my first kind of our world, but with magic and spirits and powers and things.
And it's very exciting. And go look at the cover, everyone, if you haven't seen it yet. It's great. Question for both of you, whoever wants to go first. But did you like always know that you were going to write something in fantasy, or how did we get into this area of writing fantasy? And I know, I'll leave it at that.
Leslie, you can go first.
Fantasy, I don't think I always knew. I was always writing, and I was always attracted to speculative fiction to some degree. But I got in through like Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, like those kind of TV shows, which aren't actually fantasy, but they're considered speculative. And so just things that were just a little left of center and that had something a little off about them and maybe some magic or a little horror or something like that. And when I started writing, I mean, I've always written, but as I got back into it as an adult, everything just came out with magic in it. So that was kind of my clue. Like I would try to write a regular story and somebody would have powers. And so I was like, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing. This is what I'm about right now.
Yeah, I'm a fantasy writer from the very beginning. I grew up on, the Belgariad and the Dragonlance Chronicles, Raceland. Oh, my heart. If you don't see a little Raceland in Serapio, you're not looking. So that was really my world. I think I wrote my first epic fantasy in maybe 8th grade. Yeah, it's not even a Tolkien knockoff. It's like a Belgariad knockoff. It was so bad. But anyway, it's like white boys like going on quests with elves. So yeah, I knew what I was going to do probably from the beginning. I mean, I had very many careers. I was a computer programmer too, like Leslie. I was a lawyer. And then only later in life did I become a writer because I was not a very good lawyer. So I was like, well, I'll do this other thing that I really love instead. So yeah.
I love that. You both are extremely talented in all these different areas. That is wild to find out. I sticking on this fantasy genre thing, and again, a question for both of you. I mean, fantasy has always been growing and evolving, but like I feel like really over the past couple of years, we've started to see the genre grow in new and different ways. And what is your hope for the future of sci-fi fantasy as a genre? Or you don't have to include sci-fi. Sorry, I'm so used to it because that's the section. They're both combined in the section of the story. I hardly ever say one without the other. Like, what is your hope for fantasy, or what would you like to see for the future of fantasy?
Yeah. Do you have thoughts?
I think we're seeing it. I think you're right. Over the past few years, since I started publishing, I actually started self-published because I wasn't convinced that anyone was going to take my, epic fantasy with brown people. And I wasn't seeing a lot of that being published. But over the past few years, that has changed, and you're seeing things that you've never seen before. I think one of the reasons why like Black Sun resonates is because it's a world we don't see. And you're seeing more people telling stories that are personal to them, that are about, their history, their ancestors, their cultures, or things that they just haven't seen represented. And we're seeing just all kinds of representation that everyone gets their stories told. And I would like to see more of that. I think that, there's still things that we haven't seen, that we haven't imagined yet, that we'll get to, because more people are feeling empowered and are being published and are publishing other people. So that would be my hope, just to continue that.
Yeah, and I 100% agree. I mean, there's so much exciting work out there right now that is just blowing me away. Like, yeah. So, agreed. I was like going to start naming people, but I was like, well, maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah, and I do appreciate, I think that we're seeing as booksellers, like, to your point, Leslie, about self-pubbed authors, we're definitely seeing the influence of social media, particularly TikTok, and what it looks like for an audience to be able to show, like, hey, there's actually high demand for this. Like, this is really hitting. Either get on board, or it's fine. We'll buy this self-pubbed author's book, and we don't need to go through you. So it's really exciting. I think from a bookseller standpoint, see that. I want to go back to our series for a second, and but something that I want both of your thoughts on. But starting kind of with you, Rebecca. I mean, when I read Black Sun's first chapter, I was like, what am I getting into? This is wild. I'm so in. I'm so excited. I'm gripping. And I feel that is a universal experience because many people have told us that because we put that in a TikTok and people were like, I know exactly what book you were talking about. And then I was like, oh, how are we going to start in Fevered Star? Which I'm sure felt like a lot of pressure. And I'm sure universally for both of you, it's difficult. The first chapter and the first line of something can be a big deal. So how is that, like a conscious decision you've made? Is that something you have to work through with your editor to figure out like what makes the most sense? Or was it really just like, you're like, wow, you're really reading into this, and like it was just where it made sense to pick up the story where it started?
Yeah, well, for me, so I also write short fiction. And so, the first chapter in Black Sun is really all sort of about the gut punch. It helps to have a hook. It helps to get the reader involved immediately. So yeah, I knew what I was doing. And like I had said for Fevered Star, for people who really want that sort of fast-paced sort of, Fevered Star is a little bit slower, and that's on purpose. I really wanted it to feel a little more traditionally like epic fantasy. But there is a murder in the first chapter. I don't know what you people want. So, and so no, I did not want to do this. Like like I didn't have, there's not a countdown in the second book. And it is a little bit slower. The world takes its time to unfold, I think. And that's not to say it's a slow pace. I don't think, because I don't think I can write anything particularly slowly paced, because I start to get anxious. But I did want it to feel, sort of like, I guess I wanted to do justice to this idea of history, and that it's carrying all this history. So we're not on the swift journey, to the convergence, where we're sort of the flower in bloom that's showing you, the what's under the iceberg.
I love that. Well, and Leslie, for you, like, kind of adapting that question a little bit, but like, what pressure do you feel of a first chapter or a first line of a first chapter to kind of draw the reader in? What is that experience like for you as an author?
Yeah, you do feel that, because I know just my experience as a reader, I will read the first, pick up a book, read the first chapter. If it doesn't hit me, I don't buy it. So it has to grab me, and I have a short attention span. So for me, it's 75% of the time I have the first chapter, and the first time I write it, that's it. Because I wait until I know it, and then I write it. And then the other 25% of the time, I struggle and rewrite it 50 times. But so it helps me if during my plotting period, like I figured out the way in, and when the first line comes to me, most of the time I don't have to change it, because it's just that's what hooked me, and that's what got me into wanting to write it. And then, so as a reader, it's the same thing. But it is extremely important, and I think you pour over it, and so it's just a matter of, I kind of do it ahead of time, or do you do it on the back end and revise it until you hit it and you feel it,
Leslie, I have a question. Do you write in order? Do you write your chapters in order, or do you skip around?
Okay. I write in order. Yeah, almost always. Because I have to feel the emotions of the characters as they grow and change through the book. And so when I revise, I can change it. But when I'm first writing it, it has to be in order.
Yeah, same. I agree.
I was gonna be like, Rebecca, you say
yeah, absolutely. In order, because I have to grow with the character. Like I have to follow their journey. Yeah, in order.
I know that screenwriters exist, but I've yet to hear anyone own that that's how they write. So every time I hear someone ask this question, everyone's always like, "Oh, I could never write out of order."
Yeah.
Someone out there is. I know someone is.
There are, yeah. Some people start at the end and write backwards. I mean, people do all kinds of things.
Next question goes to I think what I'm trying to make sure I'm saying this in a way that's not spoilery. Thinking hard, everyone. I think what's fun as a reader, especially with the opening of Fevered Star, is that we get some time with some characters who were very much like a part of the story in major ways in Black Sun, but we like don't know as much about them. And I think it's not spoilery to say, like one of those that I feel like we get more time with is Lord Balam. Right? Like and so was that fun for you, Rebecca? Like, have you kind of been waiting to be like, wait till you see what I have in store for some of these characters that you like don't get much of? Is that like, what is the experience like on your end? Because as the reader, it's very fun to be like, okay, now I'm getting more from them. Like, what's coming next?
Yeah, I love Lord Balam. He's like one of my favorites because he's just sort of, he's like a bit of a mastermind, very sort of, I don't know, cool-headed, but just a little bit nuts. Anyway, I love him. So I had a blast writing his chapters, actually. And so I hope people like him as he starts to come in as like a major player, because I think, he was very minor in Black Sun, but I always had bigger plans for him. I always knew he was kind of a badass, and I just wanted to see his sort of ascension and to see, what came next for him. So yeah, I like him a lot. That was fun.
Yeah. I will, again, remain spoiler free, but everyone, if you haven't read it, like he's got a great way that you fail and bring him into the story. We have a great question from Emily, who wants to know, if Maggie and Kai from Trail of Lightning met the characters from Black Sun, how would you imagine them interacting? And Emily also just wants to note, she absolutely loves all of the characters you've written.
Oh, wow. Thank you. I don't know. I don't know that anyone wants to sit with Maggie. I don't know. I can imagine they're at the lunch table and Maggie's just like, really? Really? What the F is this? Crows? Seems a little, seems a little pretentious. So I just don't know. But I'm sure Kai would get along with everybody, and I don't know. Maybe Xiala and Maggie would get along in the long run. Maybe if they started drinking. It's Raphael's just gonna be emo in the corner. Let's face it.
Oh my gosh, I think that's 100% true. Yeah, if you let them drink and gamble a little bit,
Yeah, get along.
yeah, play some games together, they'll probably figure it out. Jennifer wants to know if your research for your books included travel, and if so, what locations?
Oh, Penelope or Leslie can go first.
I do not. Well, I have had some stories that take place in like contemporary in San Francisco. And San Francisco, I used to live in Oakland. I went to grad school out there. So anytime I can go there and do research, which is actual research, but it's also like research. But I haven't got any place cool to do research. I live outside of DC, and I kind of grew up in Maryland. So when I was researching for The Monsters We Defy, it was very convenient, especially since that book was a complete pandemic book. So I couldn't really travel while I was writing the bulk of it. So I was relying on just driving through DC or my memories of living in that city. So no fun travel things for me yet.
Yeah, now you can come up with a place that you're like, I need to write a book in this area. I have to travel there for research.
Right.
Yeah, I did. I didn't go there for research, but I did go to the Caribbean right before the pandemic shut everything down. I actually was on a cruise with a bunch of other writers like John Scalzi and N.K. Jemisin and Martha Wells. And we were like the last ship into Fort Lauderdale before they closed the port. Oh. I know, it was sort of terrifying, actually, because we didn't realize it was so bad until it was that bad. And we were like off the news for a week and we didn't know what was going on. But anyway, so I feel like I did a little Teek research. Like we went to the Dominican Republic and, and I feel like that's very Teek oriented. But I have not been to Mexico or Guatemala, which obviously I would love to go to. But that just hasn't worked out. But one day, yes, that would be awesome. And of course, I've been to the Four Corners many, many, many times. So Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, those areas I know very well.
That is just so funny to hear you bring that up, because John Scalzi was just in St. Louis at the end of May talking about this
experience. Talking about the cruise? Oh, that's awesome.
Because he was telling the audience how not only were you all like figuring out and finding out on this cruise, like how bad it was and other stuff, but he had like before going on the cruise had some kind of meal, I think, with Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson, who, if everyone remembers, like got COVID. And so there was like a scare that he had while on the cruise where they were like trying to figure out if he was in the window or not, and all worked out. But yeah, he was just hearing about that. I had no idea that you were on that too. It sounds like a wild experience for everyone. So thank you, Jennifer and Emily. Great questions. Oh, Emily had one more question for you, Rebecca. If you had to pick a favorite character from Black Sun and Fevered Star, my question I'm adding to this is, can you? And if you can, who would it be and why?
Oh, they're all my children. I love them. And every one of them has a part of me. I think that's what most authors do is, often your characters have a little part of you. Certainly not one-to-one. So please don't do that to authors. That's horrible. We're like, no, it's fiction. We made it up. It's not me, but certainly parts of me. And so, yeah, I kind of love them all equally. Like maybe Serapio, but then like some days I'm like, oh no, but Xiala. And then some days I'm even like, you know what, Narampa, poor thing, so.
Narampa's been through some stuff.
Oh yeah, he went through the ringer.
My goodness. Yeah, sorry. I'm like retracking what happens to her in Fevered Star, and I'm like, let's go. Okay, we have reached one of my favorite points of our interviews where we get to do a little bit of this or that. Again, no high stakes questions. They are just like fantasy themed. The only rule is if you don't like either of the options, you just have to provide the third option of what the answer would be. So you just can't go without answering the question. So the first thing is, and I don't know why this led to such a great discussion and booksellers today, but if you had to choose in the fantasy realm between dragons and unicorns, which would you choose?
Well, I have a dragon book, but I really want to say unicorns. So let's go with that. I've never written unicorns. I've written dragons, so I think we'll go with unicorns.
100% dragons.
Yeah, I think that's so funny. And this is like the same, Leslie, the same thing that happened to you is what happened to half of us, where everyone was like, that's really what you would answer. And like everyone answered opposite of what makes like sense for them. So Rebecca,
Right.
before answering what?
Absolutely. I want to breathe fire. I don't need a shiny horn. No,
Right.
thank you. Right?
I like just sparkle and, heal things. I don't know.
The hunter or the hunted, right? I don't know.
Oh, incredible. If you had to choose between urban fantasy and high fantasy, what would you choose?
Oh,
Which is tough. It's tough.
that's tough.
They're so good.
I know. How about an urban high fantasy?
I like it. I like it.
That's that city one that I wanted to write. My editor said no.
You just go city to city, like in a space car or something. Just have a quest from city to city.
Yeah, vampires on a quest. It could happen. I could
Right,
see it, right? Oh,
I would read that book in a heartbeat.
yeah. It's a little Castlevania-esque, right? So it can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
Like it.
we could all thank N.K. Jemisin for that question because we're literally looking at the city we became and like, how would you choose between that? Okay, this one got wild, but angels or demons?
So I'm going to answer that one. No, you answer first because I have like a long thing. I'm not gonna...
I was very, as soon as you said you had a theology degree, I was like, oh, this is about to get
right.
Go ahead, Leslie.
Yes, I don't think mine is going to be scientific or based on anything. I do have an angel series, and I have a demon series in me that I have not written yet. I think the demons are just more interesting. I mean, I try to make my angels interesting, and I think they are. I've read a lot of great angels, but I'm going to still go with demons.
So I have a novella coming out in November called Tread of Angels, and it is about fallen angels. So I'm going to go with fallen angels over angels or demons because, I like that rebel vibe. I like the
best of both worlds.
Exactly. And so Tread of Angels, yes, it's like a Western noir inspired by Silverton, actually, where it's like a mining colony and, I guess the late 1800s. And instead of mining silver, the people mined the corpse of a fallen angel. And they make their technology from that. It's kind of steampunky. So, yeah. And there's a demon lord. And he's hot. So, not literally and figuratively.
It's always the nerd. We all know we go for the bad boys. And
right.
can't resist a demon lord. And it just like... Yeah. I did not know about that novella, and I am immediately thrilled and sad that I have to wait until November is when it's coming out.
Well, the arc will be out, I think, in the next few months. So
yeah, that solves my problem.
Right. Everybody else has to wait.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, I love that. I'm a big novella person. So that is thrilling. Okay, brings us to our last one. And I'm very curious about this. So, are you enemies to lovers or friends to lovers?
I have very strong feelings about this as a romance writer.
Give us your strong feelings. I want to hear them.
I'm enemies to lovers all the way. And I don't understand friends to lovers because I feel like there's not like friends to lovers, especially when it's like, oh, neither of us ever had feelings for each other until this one time. I feel like if you are, attracted to that other person, then one of you is going to be attracted. Like, I don't know that I believe in like that kind of friendship without somebody being attracted. So I'm an enemies to lovers person. That's my literal favorite trope of all romance tropes.
That trope is a great time.
I'm going to support Leslie. I think she's right. She knows what she's talking about. I don't have a strong opinion, but it is kind of sexy when, you fictionally hold a knife to someone's neck.
Right? And you can overcome that.
I know, right?
Lots to overcome. I was trying to figure out what your answer would be, Rebecca, because I was like trying to think if I would consider, and again, I'm not saying this in context of any future books, everyone. I'm just saying it based off of what we know in Black Sun. But, we had some, I would not call Xiala and Serapio like enemies, right?
Right. But they weren't friends. I think they're just lovers. Like, they met.
Strangers.
It went straight to like, they are friends, yes, but it wasn't like, oh, we're friends for a long time and suddenly we're in love. It's like, hey, want to hook up? Yes, I do. It's a little more like that.
Yeah, that's fair.
Or it wasn't even a yes, I do. It was like, I'm on a mission from God.
Right? I can't really deal with you right now, but
Exactly.
Yes, that's so funny. That is true. His reaction was like, I have a vision from God. I'm so sorry. I really cannot focus on this. The only thing I totally agree with the enemies to lovers. It's definitely my favorite. I will say, Sulin Tan convinced me. Daughter of the Moon Goddess is friends to lovers to enemies to lovers.
Ooh, okay.
Okay, I'm into this. This is because their characters like grow up together.
Oh,
and
yeah.
go from the friendship stage to like, I think there's something here, and then we have a tragic inciting incident, and then we have to go back to each other, and it's a really great time for. I was like,
I will accept that.
Yeah, multiple stands where we spoke our enemies to lovers. Well, thank you both so much. This has been so incredibly wonderful to meet you both and to hear you both talk about your amazing books. Everyone watching, thank you so much. I want to highlight again and throw this up here. If you haven't purchased your copies of Black Sun or Fevered Star, trust me, we are stocked up at the Novel Neighbor because we will not stop selling this series. And if you're not in St. Louis, we are happy to ship it to you. So you can find that on our website. As well as Leslie's books are also available on our website. There are so many incredible ones. Leslie, you have a great website that rolls out everything because we have so many incredible series. So I want to highlight all of that. And is there anything you all want to say before we log off this evening?
Oh, I guess I just want to thank Leslie for joining me to talk about Fevered Star. I really loved it. I've known Leslie forever. She read a very early version of Trail of Lightning. So
I knew that she was a superstar then. I was like, oh. So good.
And of course, thank Novel Neighbor for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Very cool.
Yeah, thanks you guys. It was great talking to you, and everybody go read all of the books.
Yes, go read all of the books. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your tour, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Good night, Leslie. Good night, Rebecca.
Good night.